We're going to open it up for questions from the audience. There are two microphones out there if you wanted to step up and ask a question. And we'd like to keep it kind of general, if you could, on the geopolitical theme. Wow, there's a huge line. It's overwhelming. Anyone, be brave, be the first. If you could state where you're from.
Bobby Buchanan from Goddard. Sorry to hog the mic. I've been listening and thinking about China and their long-term vision and extraordinary strength and capacity. I'm wondering what your thoughts and ideas are about them being increasingly involved in global actions, in particular in Africa, among other places. Thanks.
Any takers? Do you want to go? Richard?
I'll give it. So we've been working in China, that you can hear me right, since 2001. What we have found, just from a geopolitical perspective, is that the national government would tell you one thing and then the provinces will tell you something else, and those can be quite different. We've been able to achieve some change at the provincial level that the national level, frankly speaking, wanted to block. And so there's interesting dynamics in southern China, which tends to be, it's far enough away from Beijing where you get some interesting things going on. The bigger, probably a bigger question that I have in my mind, and this is not just China specific, is that there are a number of the countries that we work in where they are in a local market dynamic already. So when you talk to them about buy local, they kind of go, well, that's what we're already doing. So how can this movement that wants to support those kinds of things, in essence, leapfrog so that they don't have to go the negative dynamic? Is there something that can be done to insert change now? And I know that's what many of you are working on. I just asked the question because it isn't readily apparent to me all of what we could do to make that kind of, that switch flip somehow. Because many of these are already local produced systems. That's their dominant economy already. And we don't want to have them go through those other painful transitions. Thank you.
One of the questions is how those local means of production can be more sustainable and be more compatible with some of the protected areas that they're bumping into. And there's actually a lot of new interest and new movement by NGOs and other organizations in China right now. And it's going to be interesting to see, as well as philanthropy is growing in China as well, which is a new thing. So it's going to be interesting how those vectors can all come together to make change in a rapidly growing economy. There's another question?
Hi, my name is Dawn King from Brown University, and I think my question is more targeted towards Allison, but in general as well. And I see oftentimes, I've studied food hubs myself, and when we're talking about local sustainable food, there's often this dichotomy between the large agribusiness and the small-scale multi-vegetable farmer. But I'm interested in what you think the role is of these mid-scale farmers that we really seem to be losing in the United States. So the 500-acre, the 200, 500-acre guys who might just be doing 1 to 3 crops, and where you see the role of that in scaling up local food to the larger system.
Can you hear me? I don't know if this thing is working. Oh, there we go. So in just speaking about Western North Carolina, we certainly have a lot of smaller scale farms. We also have some of those mid-scale farms that you're talking about, and the organization that I'm with, ASAP, works both with the really small scale farms and also the mid-sized farms. And we see, in terms of building the local food system there, we see our role as helping farms that are working at different scales of production, even though all of them are, relatively small, even the mid-scale. And we're working with the mid-scale farms to serve grocery stores, for example. We have in Western North Carolina a regionally based grocery store called Ingles that is the only game in town in many of the rural communities in the region, and the region is mostly rural with the exception of Asheville. And so we do think that mid-sized farms have a role in local food system development, and we work with them to get them into places like Ingalls. But they are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place because they're too big to make a living from selling in direct markets like farmers markets or doing CSAs or selling off farm. But they're not big enough to play in the global market. And so what we're doing is really trying to plug them into regionally based grocery store chains to help them, have the economic sustainability that they need to have in order to stay in business. And for us, for ASAP, local food system development, because we do exist in a capitalist economy, that's where we are right now. Economic sustainability for farms really is crucial, because if they can't make a living from farming, then they can't continue to farm, and we continue to lose farmland to housing developments and whatnot. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but just for us, the mid-sized farms really are a crucial piece in Western North Carolina, and we're just, we're working to try and plug them into, the larger scale markets in the region to help their viability.
There's a question over here.
Hi, I'm Anna Irwin. I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech, and I'm from Western North Carolina, and I've spent a lot of time in Peru. So my main questions are for Allison and Kevin. Knowing what we know about white privilege and gender and these issues with food justice, how do you see the local food movement in places like Western North Carolina, where race is still a very big issue, and in Peru, where economic privilege, especially in the area of Miraflores, how do you see the local food movement addressing these issues that are obstacles in the local food movement?
So in Western North Carolina, kind of getting back to one of the points of my presentation, is really engaging the population in food and food production, and not just white people. And the way that we do that is through trying to create these spaces of engagement, or what I've been calling these spaces of engagement, that allow people to experience food and agriculture firsthand. And spaces of engagement might be at a farmer's market where there are lots of white people, or spaces of engagement might be in a school system where there is, for example, in Henderson County, a high population of Hispanic students. Or spaces of engagement might be in an area where there's high poverty, and in a community center where we're conducting, food tastings and cooking demonstrations, and trying to engage the population there in cooking with foods that are meaningful to them and appropriate to their culture. And so that's one. And so that's spaces of engagement is certainly one way. I mean, we also do try to bring in the infrastructure so that people can use EBT, for example, at farmers markets. But just because you've got the EBT infrastructure there doesn't mean that people that are on food assistance are going to come and spend their money there and come and experience what farmers markets have to offer. And so we're really trying to take those experiences, out in various venues within the community, and in the school systems in particular, to reach that broader base of constituents.
I think in the case in Peru, what I see as being advantageous, or not necessarily this is just one particular market, which is one pathway to expanding consumer awareness about organics. And I don't think in many ways it is ill-suited to addressing some of those issues like we talked about, like whether it's white privilege or catering to this affluent clientele. On the other hand, there are some of the same NGOs that are been instrumental in promoting this market are also working on improving subsistence production with farmers outside of Lima, or focusing on community food security projects in other parts of the city. So I see this market as being sort of one possible strategy to to one, sort of promoting farmer livelihoods for those that are fortunate enough to get an organic certification, but by no means is it the answer. And I think that some of the other efforts of NGOs that are more producer-oriented are helping sort of also address some of the deeper needs around low access or low income consumers and farmers. And I think that there are some more subtle ways too that this particular market has a ripple effect beyond just the space of the market exchange. And I think that there's evidence of sort of a growing consumer awareness beyond just the affluent clientele. In Lima, there's an event in Lima that happens every year for the past few years now called La Mistura. And in this event, it celebrates Peruvian cuisine and gastronomy, in a sense, had over, I think one record said over 500,000 attendees last year, right? So that many people coming to a market that celebrates a traditional sort of Peruvian food that's often associated with a kind of approach to farming that's non-conventional, I think demonstrates a kind of growing consumer awareness around this. So it's not a totally insular thing. And I think that the market in some ways can help expand that awareness.
Sir?
Hello, my name is Luis Yepes. I'm part of the Breakthrough Leaders class. I guess my question would be to Craig and to Kevin. In regards to Latin America, we have the dynamics in which the local food movement is basically catering to the affluent part of the society. Have you guys seen, in Mexico and in Peru, have you guys seen any movements in which farmers that usually grow their crops to sell it to the affluent markets that are sometimes not able to even consume it themselves? Have you guys seen any type of movements which address that particular problem in order to allow farmers to have even access, or people without access to those type of foods to have access to the food? Are any NGOs working on that you guys have seen?
With respect to Monterrey, I have not seen that. At the same time, my field work at this point is about a little bit over a year, and so I would not at all want to say that it's not there, and it's, as I implied in my presentation, it is one of the questions that I want to try and address more explicitly in the next round of field work. At the same time, I think it is a very important question, both because of the danger that if we think of how social change movements in a society develop, and the extent to which they can be entirely based on the less privileged, or the extent to which they may have some different effectiveness if they in fact integrate people from different levels of privilege. To have one group saying, well, we're enjoying this very special food and we can continue to enjoy it, and we don't see that as diminishing the opportunities of the less privileged to increase their access to food. I think it does diminish the change dialectic there, and I think that's the danger.
In regards to some of the value-added products, like the cheese-making business, for example, I think that food is not really accessible by the people who are providing the milk. And I think we see that kind of situation replicated a lot, even in the U.S. Farmers who are growing strawberries can't afford to necessarily buy that product themselves, or certain kinds of meat that might be sold at a farmer's market. A lot of times those farmers they're not consuming their own product, right? It's too valuable to be put on the market. So on the other hand, there are NGOs, like I talked about, one called the National Association of Ecological Producers, Peru, or AMPE. And this organization is one that's both helped sort of facilitate the organic farmers market and get that market off the ground, but they're also working on other bioferias in rural parts of the country that depend not on a third-party certification, but on the participatory guarantee systems, where farmers are sort of more able to certify one another and not have to pay a large overhead. So they're still in that sense, they're expanding this idea of organic producers to to lower the bar for participation, which also increases the amount of producers who could participate and lowering the price at the same time. This same organization is also working on sort of agroecology and supporting producers in other ways beyond just access to organic markets. So there's some sense of that, but I think that in regards to a lot of the products that you see at this Bioferia and Miraflores, it isn't really accessible to a lot of the producers themselves, which is a shame.
Thank you.